Racist teacher thought I kidnapped my own adopted daughter due to our different skin colors, harassed us for weeks and made false reports to authorities. Security footage exposed her lies and revealed she had been questioning her about our family and telling her not to trust us. I'm Morgan, 34M, and my daughter Rachel, 7F, is adopted. I'm Asian American and my wife Sienna, 32F, is white. We adopted Rachel when she was 3 after her biological parents lost custody due to substance abuse issues. Rachel is blonde with blue eyes and looks nothing like me, but she's been my daughter for 4 years now. Rachel goes to Riverside Elementary here in Colorado. Her teacher Mrs. Taylor, 55F, has been teaching there for 23 years. She's one of those teachers who thinks she knows everything about every family and has strong opinions about how children should be raised. Rachel has mentioned before that Mrs. Taylor makes comments about how different we look and asks questions about why Rachel doesn't look like her daddy. Last month, Sienna had to go to Denver for a work conference. She's a marketing coordinator for a tech company and these conferences happen twice a year. I work as a software developer and my schedule is flexible, so I took the day off to spend with Rachel. We decided to go to the mall to buy her new shoes for school and maybe catch a movie. Rachel was excited because we rarely get one-on-one time together. She's been asking for these light-up sneakers she saw at the store, and I figured it was a perfect opportunity. We drove to Westfield Mall around noon. Rachel was chattering about her friend's birthday party coming up and how she wanted to wear her new shoes to it. We went to the shoe store first. Rachel tried on 3 different pairs before settling on the one she originally wanted. The clerk was friendly and complimented Rachel on her choice. We paid and headed to the food court to grab lunch before the movie. Rachel wanted pizza and I got a sandwich. We sat at a table near the fountain where Rachel could watch the water while she ate. After lunch, we walked around the mall. Rachel saw a toy store and asked if we could look inside. I said yes, and we spent about 20 minutes looking at different toys. Rachel found a small stuffed elephant she really liked, so I bought it for her. She hugged it tight and said it looked like the elephant from her favorite book. We were walking toward the movie theater when Rachel spotted the candy store. She asked if she could get some gummy bears for the movie. I agreed, and we went inside. The store was busy with several families buying candy. Rachel picked out a small bag of gummy bears and we got in line to pay. That's when I heard a voice behind me say my name. I turned around and saw Mrs. Taylor standing there with 2 other women I didn't recognize. Mrs. Taylor looked at me, then at Rachel, then back at me with a strange expression on her face. Mrs. Taylor walked up to us and asked Rachel what she was doing at the mall. Rachel smiled and said she was shopping with her daddy and showed Mrs. Taylor her new shoes and stuffed elephant. Mrs. Taylor's face got tight and she asked Rachel where her mommy was. Rachel explained that mommy was at work in Denver. Mrs. Taylor then asked me to step aside and talk to her privately. She said she needed to ask me some questions about Rachel. I told her I didn't understand what she meant, but I moved a few feet away while Rachel continued looking at the candy display. Mrs. Taylor asked me for identification and proof that Rachel was my daughter. I was confused and asked her why she needed that. She said that as Rachel's teacher, she was concerned about the situation and wanted to make sure Rachel was safe. She said it looked suspicious that I was alone with Rachel when she knew Sienna was Rachel's primary caregiver. I pulled out my wallet and showed her my driver's license and a family photo I carry. Mrs. Taylor looked at both and said the photo could be anyone and that my last name being different from Rachel's was concerning. I explained that Rachel kept her original last name when we adopted her because she wanted to honor her biological parents' memory. Mrs. Taylor said she wasn't convinced and that she had a responsibility to protect Rachel. She said she was going to call mall security to sort things out. I told her that was unnecessary and that she could call Sienna if she had concerns. Mrs. Taylor said she already tried calling Sienna but got voicemail. At this point, Rachel came over and asked what was wrong. Mrs. Taylor knelt down and asked Rachel if she felt safe with me. Rachel looked confused and said of course she did because I was her daddy. Mrs. Taylor asked Rachel if I had taken her anywhere she didn't want to go or if I had made her do anything she didn't want to do. Rachel started to look scared and moved closer to me. She asked Mrs. Taylor why she was asking these questions. Mrs. Taylor said she was just making sure Rachel was okay and that sometimes adults who aren't really someone's family might try to trick children. I picked Rachel up and told Mrs. Taylor that she was completely out of line and that I was leaving with my daughter. Mrs. Taylor stepped in front of me and said she couldn't let me leave with Rachel until security arrived. She said she was protecting Rachel from a potentially dangerous situation. The 2 women with Mrs. Taylor moved closer and one of them said she thought Mrs. Taylor was right to be concerned. She said it was obvious that Rachel and I weren't related and that the whole situation seemed suspicious. The other woman said she was calling 911 because it looked like a kidnapping in progress. Rachel started crying and asking why the ladies were being mean to her daddy. I tried to calm her down while also trying to get past Mrs. Taylor and her friends. Mrs. Taylor grabbed Rachel's arm and said she was taking her to the mall security office to wait for the police. I told Mrs. Taylor not to touch my daughter and that she had no right to take her anywhere. Mrs. Taylor said she was a mandated reporter and that she suspected child endangerment. She said she would rather be wrong and have Rachel safe than ignore warning signs. Mall security arrived at that moment. There were 2 officers, and Mrs. Taylor immediately started talking to them. She said she was Rachel's teacher and that she was concerned about Rachel's safety. She said I had no proof that Rachel was my daughter and that I was acting suspiciously. The security officers asked me for identification and asked about my relationship to Rachel. I showed them my license and explained that Rachel was my adopted daughter. I also showed them the family photo and Rachel's adoption papers that I keep in my wallet for situations like this. One of the security officers asked Rachel if she knew me. Rachel said I was her daddy and that we were buying candy for the movie. The officer asked Rachel if she felt safe with me, and Rachel said yes. The officer asked Rachel what my name was, and Rachel said Daddy Morgan. The security officer looked at Mrs. Taylor and said it appeared that Rachel was indeed my daughter and that there was no issue. Mrs. Taylor argued that adoption papers could be faked and that the whole situation was suspicious. She said she wanted to wait for the police to arrive and have them sorted out. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. There were 2 officers, and they spoke with Mrs. Taylor first. She repeated her concerns and said she was acting in Rachel's best interest. She said she had never seen me at any school functions and that Sienna was always the one who came to parent-teacher conferences. The officers then spoke with me. I explained the situation and showed them my identification and Rachel's adoption papers. I also gave them Sienna's phone number and asked them to call her. One of the officers called Sienna and put her on speakerphone. Sienna confirmed that I was her husband and Rachel's father. She said she was in Denver for work and that she had planned this day for Rachel and me to spend together. She said she was upset that Mrs. Taylor was harassing her family and that she wanted to file a complaint. The officer spoke with Rachel again. Rachel told them that I was her daddy and that we lived together with her mommy. She said we were having a fun day together and that she didn't understand why Mrs. Taylor was being mean. The officers told Mrs. Taylor that there was no evidence of any wrongdoing and that I was clearly Rachel's father. They said she had no legal authority to detain Rachel and that her actions could be considered harassment. Mrs. Taylor said she was just trying to protect Rachel and that she still had concerns. The officers suggested that Mrs. Taylor contact Child Protective Services if she had ongoing concerns about Rachel's welfare, but they said there was no basis for any immediate action. They told Mrs. Taylor and her friends to leave us alone and said they would file a report about the incident. Mrs. Taylor left with her friends, but not before saying that she would be keeping a close eye on Rachel at school. Rachel was still crying and asking why her teacher was mad at her. I bought her the gummy bears and we went to see the movie, but Rachel was quiet and distracted the whole time. We went home early and Rachel went straight to her room. She didn't want to talk about what happened and she didn't want to play with her new toy. When Sienna got home that evening, Rachel ran to her and started crying again. Sienna held her and asked what was wrong. Rachel told Sienna about what happened at the mall and how Mrs. Taylor said I might not be her real daddy. Sienna got very quiet and asked me to tell her exactly what happened. I went through the whole story, and Sienna's face got redder as I talked. Sienna said she was going to the school first thing Monday morning to speak with the principal. She said Mrs. Taylor had crossed a line and that she wanted her removed from Rachel's class. Sienna also said she was going to file a complaint with the school district and possibly pursue legal action. I told Sienna that I was worried about how this would affect Rachel at school. Rachel already felt different from her classmates because of the adoption, and I didn't want this to make things worse for her. Sienna said that Mrs. Taylor had created this situation and that we needed to protect Rachel from further harassment. Rachel has been different since the mall incident. She's been clingy and asking more questions about the adoption. She asked me if I was really her daddy and if Mrs. Taylor was right that we don't look alike. I assured her that I am her father and that families come in all different combinations. Rachel also asked if she was going to get in trouble at school because of what happened. I told her that she did nothing wrong and that Mrs. Taylor was the one who made a mistake. Rachel said she was scared to go back to school and see Mrs. Taylor. Sienna took Monday off work to go to the school with me. We met with Principal Johnson and explained what happened at the mall. Principal Johnson said she was shocked by Mrs. Taylor's behavior and that it was completely inappropriate. She said she would be investigating the matter and taking appropriate action. Principal Johnson also said she would be speaking with Mrs. Taylor about maintaining professional boundaries and understanding family diversity. She said the school district had policies about discrimination and that Mrs. Taylor's actions potentially violated those policies. We asked if Rachel could be moved to a different class, but Principal Johnson said it was difficult to do mid-semester without a compelling reason. She said she would monitor the situation closely and that we should contact her immediately if there were any further issues. That's where things stand now. Rachel is back in school, but she's been having nightmares and doesn't want to participate in class activities. Sienna and I are considering our options, including possibly moving Rachel to a different school or pursuing legal action against Mrs. Taylor. I keep thinking about what would have happened if the situation had escalated further or if Rachel had been traumatized even more than she already was. Mrs. Taylor's actions were based on her assumptions about what a family should look like, and she was willing to put Rachel through a terrifying experience rather than admit she was wrong. Has anyone else dealt with something like this? I'm not sure what our next steps should be, but I know we need to protect Rachel from any further harassment or discrimination. Update 1: I posted about Mrs. Taylor accusing me of kidnapping Rachel at the mall. Several people asked for an update, so here it is. Things have gotten much worse than I expected. After our meeting with Principal Johnson, things seemed to calm down for about a week. Rachel was still nervous about going to school, but she wasn't having as many nightmares. Sienna and I thought maybe Mrs. Taylor had learned her lesson and would leave Rachel alone. We were wrong. Last Tuesday, Rachel came home from school and went straight to her room without saying hello. This was unusual because Rachel always runs to give us hugs when she gets home. Sienna went to check on her and found Rachel crying under her bed. Sienna coaxed Rachel out and asked what was wrong. Rachel said Mrs. Taylor had been asking her questions about our family during lunchtime. Mrs. Taylor asked Rachel if she remembered her real parents and if she missed them. Rachel said she told Mrs. Taylor that Sienna and I were her real parents now. Mrs. Taylor then asked Rachel if she knew why she looked different from me. Rachel said she didn't know what Mrs. Taylor meant. Mrs. Taylor said that sometimes when children get adopted, they don't really understand what happened to their birth parents and that it was okay if Rachel felt confused. Rachel asked Mrs. Taylor why she was asking these questions. Mrs. Taylor said she cared about Rachel and wanted to make sure she was happy. She said that if Rachel ever felt scared or uncomfortable at home, she could talk to Mrs. Taylor about it. Rachel told Mrs. Taylor that she was happy at home and that she loved her family. Mrs. Taylor said that was good, but sometimes children don't realize when adults are being inappropriate with them. She said Rachel should pay attention to how I acted around her and tell Mrs. Taylor if anything seemed wrong. Sienna and I were furious. We called Principal Johnson immediately and demanded a meeting for the next day. Principal Johnson said she was concerned about what Rachel had told us and that she would be speaking with Mrs. Taylor before our meeting. The next day, we met with Principal Johnson and Mrs. Taylor. Mrs. Taylor denied that the conversation with Rachel had happened the way Rachel described it. She said she was simply checking in with Rachel about how she was adjusting to being back in class after the mall incident. Mrs. Taylor said she was concerned that Rachel seemed withdrawn and that she was just trying to provide emotional support. She said she had every right to talk to her students about their well-being and that we were overreacting to her attempts to help Rachel. Sienna asked Mrs. Taylor to explain exactly what she meant by helping Rachel. Mrs. Taylor said that adopted children often have adjustment issues and that she was trained to recognize signs of distress in children. She said Rachel's behavior had changed since the mall incident and that she was monitoring the situation. I asked Mrs. Taylor why she thought Rachel's behavior had changed. Mrs. Taylor said that Rachel had become more clingy and attention-seeking in class. She said Rachel had started asking more questions about families and seemed confused about family structures. Sienna pointed out that Rachel's behavior changes were likely due to being harassed by her teacher, not because of any problems at home. Mrs. Taylor said she understood that we were defensive, but that her professional experience told her there might be more to the situation than we were admitting. Principal Johnson asked Mrs. Taylor to clarify what she meant by that statement. Mrs. Taylor said she had concerns about the family dynamic and that she thought Rachel might benefit from talking to the school counselor about her adoption and family situation. Sienna asked Mrs. Taylor if she had any specific concerns about Rachel's safety or well-being at home. Mrs. Taylor said she couldn't discuss specific concerns due to confidentiality, but that she was keeping detailed notes about Rachel's behavior and our interactions with the school. Principal Johnson said she was disappointed in Mrs. Taylor's continued focus on our family rather than on Rachel's educational needs. She said Mrs. Taylor would be required to attend additional training on cultural sensitivity and family diversity. Mrs. Taylor said she didn't need training because she had been teaching for over 20 years and knew how to recognize when children were in distress. She said she was disappointed that the school administration was more concerned about avoiding controversy than protecting students. Principal Johnson ended the meeting by saying she would be monitoring Mrs. Taylor's interactions with Rachel closely and that any further inappropriate behavior would result in disciplinary action. She also said Rachel could visit the school counselor if she wanted to, but it would be Rachel's choice, not a requirement. After the meeting, Sienna and I felt like we had won a small victory, but Mrs. Taylor's attitude made it clear that she hadn't changed her mind about our family. We decided to start documenting everything that happened with Rachel at school in case we needed to take further action. 2 days later, Rachel came home and said Mrs. Taylor had asked her to stay after class to clean the blackboard. Rachel said she was the only student asked to stay, and Mrs. Taylor had used that time to ask her more questions about our family. Mrs. Taylor asked Rachel if she remembered anything about her birth parents. Rachel said she remembered some things but that she was happy with her family now. Mrs. Taylor asked Rachel if she ever wondered why her birth parents couldn't take care of her. Rachel said she knew her birth parents had problems and that's why she needed a new family. Mrs. Taylor said that was a very grown-up way to think about it and asked Rachel if anyone had ever explained to her what kinds of problems her birth parents had. Rachel said she didn't want to talk about it anymore and asked if she could go back to her seat. Mrs. Taylor said that was fine, but that Rachel should remember that she could always talk to her if she had questions or felt confused about anything. Rachel said she told Mrs. Taylor that she talked to Sienna and me about everything and that we answered all her questions. Mrs. Taylor said that was good, but sometimes children need to talk to other adults too, especially when they have questions their parents might not be able to answer. Rachel asked what kinds of questions Mrs. Taylor meant. Mrs. Taylor said questions about why families look different and why some children need new families. Rachel said she already knew the answers to those questions and that she didn't need to talk about them anymore. Mrs. Taylor said that was fine, but that she was always available if Rachel changed her mind. Rachel said she asked Mrs. Taylor if she could go back to her seat because she wanted to pack up her backpack. Mrs. Taylor said yes, but reminded Rachel that their conversation was just between them and that she didn't need to tell anyone else about it. Rachel said she felt confused about why Mrs. Taylor told her not to tell anyone about their conversation. Rachel said she always told Sienna and me about her day at school and that she didn't understand why this conversation was different. Sienna and I were extremely upset about this. The fact that Mrs. Taylor had told Rachel not to tell anyone about their conversation was a major red flag. We called Principal Johnson immediately and demanded another meeting. Principal Johnson said she was very concerned about Mrs. Taylor's behavior and that telling Rachel not to discuss their conversation was completely inappropriate. She said she would be meeting with Mrs. Taylor immediately and that there would be consequences for her actions. The next day, Principal Johnson called us and said she had spoken with Mrs. Taylor. Mrs. Taylor denied telling Rachel not to tell anyone about their conversation. She said she had simply reminded Rachel that their talks were private and that Rachel didn't need to worry about sharing every detail with other people. Principal Johnson said she had also reviewed Mrs. Taylor's notes about Rachel and found that she had been documenting Rachel's behavior and our family interactions in excessive detail. She said some of the notes contained inappropriate speculation about our family dynamics and Rachel's emotional state. Principal Johnson said she had decided to remove Mrs. Taylor from Rachel's class effective immediately. She said Mrs. Taylor would be transferred to a different grade level and that Rachel would be assigned to Mrs. Rodriguez's class for the remainder of the school year. Sienna and I were relieved that Rachel would be away from Mrs. Taylor, but we were also concerned about how the transition would affect Rachel. We met with Mrs. Rodriguez the next day and explained the situation. Mrs. Rodriguez said she was aware of what had happened and that she would work with Rachel to help her feel comfortable in her new class. Mrs. Rodriguez seemed genuinely caring and professional. She asked Rachel about her interests and hobbies and made her feel welcome in the new classroom. Rachel seemed to like Mrs. Rodriguez and was excited about joining her class. However, we found out from another parent that Mrs. Taylor had been telling other teachers and staff members about our family situation. She had been sharing details about Rachel's adoption and expressing her concerns about Rachel's well-being. Several teachers had heard Mrs. Taylor's version of events and had formed opinions about our family based on her information. This created an uncomfortable situation for Rachel at school. Some teachers and staff members looked at us differently during pickup and drop-off times. Rachel noticed that some adults at school seemed to be watching her more closely and asking her more questions about how she was doing. Rachel asked us why everyone at school was being weird around her. We explained that sometimes adults make mistakes and that it takes time for things to get back to normal. Rachel said she wished she could go to a different school where nobody knew about what happened with Mrs. Taylor. Sienna and I have been discussing whether we should transfer Rachel to a different school. We're worried that the situation with Mrs. Taylor has created a lasting negative impact on Rachel's school experience. We're also concerned that Mrs. Taylor's influence might continue to affect how other staff members treat Rachel. We've also been considering legal action against Mrs. Taylor and the school district. Several people have suggested that Mrs. Taylor's behavior constituted harassment and discrimination based on our family structure. We consulted with a lawyer who said we might have grounds for a civil rights violation claim. The lawyer said that Mrs. Taylor's actions appeared to be motivated by bias against adoptive families and interracial families. He said her pattern of behavior suggested that she had predetermined negative assumptions about our family and that she had acted on those assumptions in ways that harmed Rachel. However, the lawyer also said that proving discrimination in this type of case could be challenging and expensive. He said we would need to document the ongoing impact on Rachel and demonstrate that the school district failed to adequately address Mrs. Taylor's behavior. We're still deciding what to do next. Rachel is doing better in her new class, but she's still having some anxiety about school. She asks us regularly if Mrs. Taylor is going to try to take her away from us again. We reassure her that Mrs. Taylor has no authority to do that, but Rachel still seems worried. Sienna has been looking into other schools in our area in case we decide to transfer Rachel. We want to make sure Rachel has a fresh start without the baggage of this situation following her. We also want to make sure that any new school we choose has policies in place to prevent this type of harassment from happening again. I'll post another update once we make some decisions about Rachel's schooling and whether we're going to pursue legal action. Right now, we're just focused on making sure Rachel feels safe and supported. Update 2: This situation has become much more complicated than I expected. I need to share what's been happening because I'm not sure how to handle it anymore. After we moved Rachel to Mrs. Rodriguez's class, things seemed to be getting better. Rachel was happier at school and her nightmares had mostly stopped. Mrs. Rodriguez was wonderful and made Rachel feel welcome. We thought the worst was behind us. Then Sienna's sister Kate, 29F, called us 2 weeks ago. Kate lives in Arizona and we only talk to her a few times a year. She's always been distant from our family, especially since we adopted Rachel. Kate never seemed comfortable with the adoption and made comments about how we were taking on someone else's problems. Kate told Sienna that she had been contacted by someone claiming to be a social worker who was investigating our family. The person said they were looking into allegations of child endangerment and wanted to interview Kate about our fitness as parents. Kate said she was confused and asked the person to explain what this was about. The person told Kate that there had been reports of concerning behavior involving Rachel and that they were conducting a thorough investigation. They asked Kate about our relationship with Rachel and whether she had any concerns about Rachel's safety or well-being. Kate said she told the person that she didn't have any concerns and that Rachel seemed happy when she visited us. The person then asked Kate specific questions about my background and whether she thought I was capable of caring for Rachel properly. Kate said the questions seemed strange and that the person seemed to already have formed opinions about our family. She said the person asked leading questions about whether Rachel seemed afraid of me or whether I had ever displayed inappropriate behavior toward Rachel. Kate told the person that she had never witnessed any inappropriate behavior and that Rachel clearly loved me. The person then asked Kate if she thought Rachel would be better off in a different family situation, perhaps with relatives who looked more like her. Kate said she was uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation and asked the person for their credentials and contact information. The person said they would call Kate back with that information, but Kate never heard from them again. Kate decided to call us because she was worried that someone was trying to cause trouble for our family. She said the person's questions seemed designed to get negative information about us rather than to genuinely investigate Rachel's well-being. Sienna and I were shocked and immediately called the local Child Protective Services office to ask if there was an investigation into our family. The supervisor we spoke with said there was no active investigation and no reports filed against us. She said if someone was claiming to be a social worker investigating our family, it was likely fraudulent. The supervisor said we should file a police report if someone was impersonating a social worker. She also said we should be aware that making false reports to Child Protective Services was a crime and that we could pursue charges if we found out who was responsible. Sienna and I were pretty sure we knew who was behind this. We suspected that Mrs. Taylor was trying to cause problems for our family even after being removed from Rachel's class. We decided to call Principal Johnson to let her know what was happening. Principal Johnson said she was very concerned about the situation and that she would be investigating whether Mrs. Taylor was involved. She said the school district took allegations of harassment seriously and that there would be serious consequences if a district employee was found to be making false reports. Principal Johnson said she would be speaking with Mrs. Taylor immediately and that she would also be contacting the school district's legal department. She said we should document everything that happened and that we should contact law enforcement if we received any more fraudulent calls. 2 days later, Principal Johnson called us back. She said she had spoken with Mrs. Taylor about the situation. Mrs. Taylor denied making any calls to Kate or impersonating a social worker. She said she had no contact with our family outside of her professional duties and that she resented being accused of harassment. Principal Johnson said she had also spoken with other staff members who had been in contact with Mrs. Taylor. She said she had learned that Mrs. Taylor had been discussing our family situation with people outside of the school district, including members of her church and her book club. Principal Johnson said Mrs. Taylor had been sharing details about Rachel's adoption and expressing concerns about Rachel's placement with our family. She said Mrs. Taylor had been seeking advice from other people about whether she should take further action to protect Rachel. Principal Johnson said this was a serious violation of student confidentiality and professional ethics. She said Mrs. Taylor would be facing disciplinary action from the school district and possibly criminal charges if she was found to have made false reports to any agencies. The next day, we received a call from someone claiming to be from the state adoption agency. The person said they were reviewing Rachel's case and wanted to schedule a home visit to check on Rachel's progress. They said it was a routine follow-up that was required for all adoptive families. I told the person that our adoption had been finalized over 3 years ago and that we had never been required to have follow-up visits. The person said that new regulations required periodic check-ins for all adoptive families with children under 10 years old. I asked the person for their name and contact information so I could verify this with our adoption attorney. The person said they would call back with that information, but they never did. I called our adoption attorney and she confirmed that there were no new regulations requiring follow-up visits for finalized adoptions. Our attorney said it sounded like someone was trying to gain access to our home under false pretenses. She said we should not allow anyone into our home who could not provide proper credentials and that we should report these incidents to the police. We filed a police report about the fraudulent calls. The detective assigned to our case said this type of harassment was becoming more common and that it was often motivated by bias against adoptive families or interracial families. He said they would be investigating the calls and trying to trace their origin. The detective said we should be very careful about protecting our personal information and that we should not engage with anyone who contacted us claiming to be from official agencies without verifying their credentials first. He said we should also consider changing our phone number if the calls continued. Rachel started asking us why we were getting so many phone calls and why we seemed worried all the time. We tried to explain that some adults were being mean to our family but that we were handling it. Rachel asked if Mrs. Taylor was still trying to take her away from us. We assured Rachel that Mrs. Taylor had no power to take her away from us and that we were protecting her from people who wanted to cause trouble. Rachel said she was scared that someone might try to take her away while she was at school. Sienna and I decided that we needed to take more serious action. We contacted the lawyer who had consulted with us earlier and asked him to help us pursue legal action against Mrs. Taylor. The lawyer said the fraudulent calls and harassment added strength to our case. The lawyer said we could pursue charges of stalking, harassment, and possibly civil rights violations. He said Mrs. Taylor's pattern of behavior suggested that she was targeting our family based on our racial and family composition. He said this type of discrimination was illegal and that we could seek damages for the harm caused to Rachel. The lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to Mrs. Taylor demanding that she stop all contact with our family and stop discussing our family situation with other people. The letter also demanded that she stop making false reports to any agencies or impersonating official personnel. Mrs. Taylor responded through her own lawyer, denying all of the allegations. Her lawyer said Mrs. Taylor had been acting within her professional duties as a teacher and that she had legitimate concerns about Rachel's well-being. Her lawyer said Mrs. Taylor had not made any false reports and that she had not harassed our family. Mrs. Taylor's lawyer also said that Mrs. Taylor had a right to free speech and that she could discuss her concerns about students with other people. The lawyer said Mrs. Taylor's actions were protected by her status as a mandated reporter and that she had been acting in Rachel's best interest. Our lawyer said Mrs. Taylor's response was typical of someone trying to justify discriminatory behavior. He said her claims about acting in Rachel's best interest were contradicted by her pattern of harassment and her focus on our family's racial composition rather than Rachel's actual well-being. The school district's investigation concluded that Mrs. Taylor had violated multiple policies regarding student confidentiality and professional conduct. Principal Johnson called us to say that Mrs. Taylor would be suspended without pay for the remainder of the school year and that she would be required to complete extensive training before being allowed to return to teaching. Principal Johnson also said that Mrs. Taylor would be transferred to a different school and that she would not be allowed to have any contact with Rachel or our family. She said the school district was taking the situation very seriously and that they were committed to ensuring that Rachel felt safe at school. However, the police investigation into the fraudulent calls was not making much progress. The detective said the calls appeared to be coming from prepaid phones and that it was difficult to trace them back to a specific person. He said they were continuing to investigate, but that it might take time to identify the caller. In the meantime, we decided to transfer Rachel to a different school for the next school year. We found a school with a good reputation for diversity and inclusion, and Rachel seemed excited about the fresh start. We also decided to change our phone number to stop the harassing calls. Rachel's new school has been wonderful. The teachers and staff are welcoming and professional, and Rachel is thriving in her new environment. She's made new friends and seems to have put the situation with Mrs. Taylor behind her. We're still pursuing legal action against Mrs. Taylor, but it's a slow process. Our lawyer says we have a strong case, but that it could take months or even years to resolve. We're prepared to see it through because we want to make sure Mrs. Taylor can't do this to another family. The whole experience has been exhausting and expensive, but we're glad we stood up for our family. Rachel is doing well and that's what matters most. We're hoping that by pursuing legal action, we can prevent Mrs. Taylor from targeting other families in the future. Update 3. I wanted to give everyone a final update on this situation since so many people have been following our story. The legal case has been resolved, and we've finally been able to move on with our lives. Our lawyer was able to prove that Mrs. Taylor was behind the fraudulent calls to Kate and the fake social worker contacts. The police investigation found that Mrs. Taylor had been using her church directory to find people connected to our family, and she had been making calls from different locations to avoid detection. The evidence showed that Mrs. Taylor had been obsessed with our family situation and had been documenting everything about Rachel's behavior and our interactions with the school. She had been sharing this information with members of her church and asking them to pray for Rachel's safety from her dangerous adoptive father. Mrs. Taylor had convinced several people at her church that Rachel was in danger and that the school district was failing to protect her. She had enlisted some of these people to help her gather information about our family and to make calls to Kate and other relatives. The police found text messages and emails between Mrs. Taylor and her church friends discussing strategies to get Rachel removed from our home. They had been planning to make reports to Child Protective Services and to contact Rachel's birth relatives to see if they would be willing to take custody of her. Mrs. Taylor had also been researching ways to challenge adoptions and had been consulting with a lawyer about whether Rachel's adoption could be reversed. She had been documenting everything she perceived as evidence of our unfitness as parents, including the fact that Rachel and I looked different and that I worked from home. The school district fired Mrs. Taylor immediately after the police investigation revealed the extent of her harassment. They also implemented new policies requiring background checks for all employees and additional training on family diversity and cultural sensitivity. Our lawyer negotiated a settlement with Mrs. Taylor that included financial compensation for our legal fees and emotional distress, as well as a restraining order preventing her from having any contact with our family. Mrs. Taylor also had to write a letter of apology to Rachel and attend counseling about bias and discrimination. The settlement amount was not huge, but it was enough to cover our legal expenses and to set up a college fund for Rachel. More importantly, it sent a clear message that Mrs. Taylor's behavior was unacceptable and that there were consequences for targeting families based on prejudice. Mrs. Taylor lost her teaching license and will not be able to work with children again. She also faced criminal charges for harassment and making false reports, which resulted in probation and community service. Our lawyer said this was a significant victory because it would be on her record permanently. Rachel has been doing wonderfully at her new school. She's in 3rd grade now and has made several close friends. Her new teacher, Mr. Williams, is fantastic and has been very supportive of Rachel's adjustment. Rachel rarely mentions Mrs. Taylor anymore and seems to have moved past the trauma of that experience. Sienna and I have also been healing from this experience. We went through a period where we were constantly worried about Rachel's safety and whether someone else might try to challenge our family. We had to work through our own feelings of violation and anger about what Mrs. Taylor had done to us. We decided not to pursue the civil rights case because the criminal case and settlement had achieved our main goals. We wanted to focus on moving forward rather than continuing to fight legal battles. Our lawyer said we had already set an important precedent that would help other families who might face similar situations. The whole experience taught us a lot about the importance of documenting everything and standing up for ourselves when we face discrimination. We learned that sometimes people in positions of authority will abuse their power based on their personal prejudices, and that we can't rely on institutions to always protect us. We also learned the importance of having a strong support network. Our adoption attorney was invaluable in helping us navigate the legal system, and Rachel's new school community has been incredibly welcoming. We've connected with other adoptive families who have faced similar challenges, and we've found strength in sharing our experiences. Rachel is now 9 years old and continues to thrive. She's involved in soccer and drama club at school, and she's developed a passion for reading and art. She occasionally asks questions about the situation with Mrs. Taylor, but mostly she seems to understand that some adults make bad choices and that we protected her from someone who was trying to hurt our family. We've never regretted our decision to fight back against Mrs. Taylor's harassment. It was expensive and emotionally draining, but it was the right thing to do for Rachel and for other families who might face similar situations in the future. We wanted to send a clear message that this type of behavior is unacceptable and that there are consequences. The restraining order against Mrs. Taylor is still in effect, and we haven't had any contact with her since the settlement was finalized. We heard through the school district that she moved to a different state, which was a relief. We hope she got the help she needed to address her prejudices, but that's not our responsibility anymore. We've also become advocates for adoptive families in our community. We volunteer with the adoption agency that helped us adopt Rachel, and we share our story with other families to help them prepare for potential challenges. We want other parents to know that discrimination against adoptive families is real, but that there are legal protections available. Looking back, I'm proud of how we handled this situation. We protected Rachel while also standing up for our rights as a family. We didn't let Mrs. Taylor's prejudices go unchallenged, and we made sure there were consequences for her actions. Most importantly, we showed Rachel that we would fight for her and that our family is strong enough to overcome challenges. Rachel recently asked us if we would adopt another child in the future. Sienna and I haven't made any decisions about that, but it was encouraging to hear that Rachel sees adoption as a positive thing despite everything she went through with Mrs. Taylor. She said she would like to have a brother or sister who needed a family like she did. This whole experience has made our family stronger and more aware of the challenges that come with being a multiracial adoptive family. We're better prepared to handle discrimination if we face it again, and we're more confident in advocating for Rachel's rights and our family's dignity. To anyone dealing with similar situations, my advice is to document everything, seek legal help early, and don't be afraid to stand up for your family. Discrimination is illegal, and there are people who will help you fight it. Don't let prejudiced individuals make you question your worth as a family or your ability to provide a loving home for your children. Rachel is happy, healthy, and loved, and that's what matters most. Mrs. Taylor's attempt to destroy our family ultimately failed, and Rachel is stronger because she saw us fight for her. We've moved on from this chapter of our lives, but we'll never forget the lessons we learned about standing up to discrimination and protecting the people we love. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I hid my daughter's threats from my son before his wedding. Now my wife won't speak to me and my daughter vandalized the venue. 6 years of family drama explodes. I'm a 58-year-old father of 2 children. My son Jake, 32, and daughter Eleanor, 28. They used to be close growing up, but had a major falling out about 6 years ago. My wife Sarah and I never found out exactly what happened, but it was bad enough that they completely stopped speaking to each other. Jake and Eleanor were always different, even as kids. Jake was outgoing and athletic, captain of the soccer team in high school. Eleanor was more introverted and artistic, spending hours in her room painting or writing poetry. Despite their differences, they got along well for most of their childhood. They'd defend each other against bullies and spend summer evenings catching fireflies together in our backyard. Things started to change when Jake left for college. Eleanor was 14 at the time and took it hard. She became more withdrawn and moody. We chalked it up to typical teenage angst, but looking back, I wonder if we should have done more to help her through that transition. In college, Jake thrived. He made the dean's list every semester and was president of the business club. Eleanor struggled more when she started college a few years later. She changed majors 3 times and had trouble making friends. We later found out she was dealing with undiagnosed anxiety and depression. Despite their diverging paths, Jake and Eleanor still seemed close when they were both home for holidays. They'd stay up late talking and laughing about inside jokes from their childhood. That's why it was such a shock when they suddenly stopped speaking to each other 6 years ago. It happened over Thanksgiving break. Jake and Eleanor had gone out to a bar with some of their old high school friends. They came home separately, hours apart. Jake looked upset but wouldn't talk about it. Eleanor locked herself in her room and cried for hours. The next morning, they both left early without saying goodbye to anyone. For weeks after, Sarah and I tried to find out what happened. We called, texted, and even showed up at their apartments unannounced. But they both refused to talk about it. Eventually, we gave up and just accepted that they weren't on speaking terms anymore. At family events, they'd completely ignore each other. It was awkward, but we learned to live with it. Sarah and I would run interference, making sure they were never seated at the same table or left alone in a room together. It broke our hearts to see our once close children so estranged, but we felt powerless to fix it. About 3 years ago, Jake met his now wife Emma. They were introduced by mutual friends at a charity gala. Jake called us the next day, excited in a way we hadn't heard in years. He said Emma was brilliant and beautiful, a pediatric surgeon with a passion for volunteering. They hit it off immediately and got engaged last year. Sarah and I really like Emma. She's smart, kind, and seems perfect for Jake. We were thrilled when they announced their engagement. Emma made an effort to get to know us, coming over for Sunday dinners and remembering little details about our lives. She even helped Sarah plant a new flower garden in our backyard. Eleanor has been living abroad for work for the past few years. After college, she got a job with an international nonprofit, doing environmental conservation work in Southeast Asia. We told her about Jake's engagement, but she didn't seem to care much. She said she probably wouldn't be able to make it to the wedding due to work commitments. We were disappointed but not surprised by Eleanor's response. She'd become more and more distant over the years, only calling on holidays and major occasions. We tried to visit her a couple times, but she always had an excuse for why it wasn't a good time. Everything was going smoothly with the wedding planning until about a month ago. Jake and Emma had chosen a beautiful vineyard venue, and Sarah was helping with the flower arrangements. We were all excited and busy with preparations. Then, out of the blue, I got a hysterical phone call from Eleanor. It was the middle of the night for her, and at first, I thought something terrible had happened. She was furious and crying, accusing me of playing favorites with Jake. When she calmed down a bit, she dropped a bombshell. She and Emma had dated briefly in college. Apparently, Emma and Eleanor had an intense relationship during Emma's freshman year. Eleanor was a junior at the time. Emma had broken things off suddenly, leaving Eleanor heartbroken. Now, Eleanor was convinced that Emma was only marrying Jake to get back at her. I was shocked and didn't know what to think. This revelation put everything in a new light: Jake and Eleanor's falling out, Emma's occasional discomfort when we brought up Eleanor, Eleanor's reluctance to come home. It felt like the missing piece of a puzzle we'd been trying to solve for years. Eleanor demanded that I stop the wedding and disown Jake unless he broke up with Emma. She said if I didn't, she'd take matters into her own hands. Her tone was scary. I'd never heard her sound so unhinged before. I told her she was being ridiculous and hung up. Over the next couple weeks, Eleanor kept texting me threats about ruining the wedding. She said she'd expose Emma as a lying cheater and make sure Jake knew the truth about his fiancée. I didn't tell anyone about this, not even Sarah. I figured Eleanor was just upset and venting, and that she wouldn't actually do anything since she was in another country. I did try to reason with Eleanor via text. I reminded her of how close she and Jake used to be, and how happy Emma made him. I suggested that maybe there had been a misunderstanding, and offered to mediate a conversation between her and Emma. But Eleanor wasn't interested in talking it out. She just kept making threats. Finally, I warned her that if she tried anything, I'd cut her off completely, financially and emotionally. This seemed to quiet her down for a few days, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I convinced myself that the crisis had been averted. The day before the wedding, Sarah and I arrived at the venue early to help set up. The vineyard looked beautiful, with fairy lights strung between the trees and flowers everywhere. But when we walked into the reception hall, my heart stopped. Someone had spray-painted "Homewrecker" in huge red letters on the wall behind where Jake and Emma were supposed to say their vows. I knew immediately it was Eleanor's doing. In a panic, I quickly arranged to have the graffiti covered up before anyone else saw it. I told the venue staff it was a prank by some local kids and paid them extra to keep quiet about it. I didn't tell Sarah or anyone else what had happened. The ceremony went off without a hitch and no one was the wiser. Jake and Emma looked so happy as they said their vows. Sarah cried tears of joy. I felt guilty keeping this secret, but I told myself it was for the best. Why ruin their special day? It wasn't until after the reception that Jake and Emma asked about the strange backdrop we'd used for the ceremony. They'd noticed it looked hastily put together and didn't match the rest of the decor. I knew I couldn't keep lying, so I finally came clean and told them everything: Eleanor's phone call, the threats, and the graffiti. Jake and Emma were upset but thanked me for protecting them from the drama on their wedding day. Jake said he'd had no idea about Eleanor and Emma's past relationship. Emma was quiet, looking guilty and scared. Sarah, on the other hand, was furious with me. She said I should have told everyone as soon as Eleanor started making threats. She accused me of having a savior complex and always trying to fix things myself instead of being upfront. She brought up other instances from our past where I'd tried to handle problems on my own without involving her. We got into a big fight about it. Sarah thinks I put Jake and Emma in danger by not warning them. She said Eleanor could have done something much worse than graffiti, and we would have been unprepared. I maintain that I was just trying to protect them and ensure their wedding wasn't ruined. It's been days and Sarah is still angry with me. She's sleeping in the guest room and barely speaking to me. Jake and Emma left for their honeymoon, and I'm worried about what they'll come home to. I feel like I've ruined everything by trying to keep the peace. I truly thought I was doing the right thing, but now I'm second-guessing myself. Did I handle this all wrong? Should I have been more upfront from the beginning? I'm lost and don't know how to fix this mess I've created. So Reddit, Ida for not telling my son about his sister's threats before the wedding? Update 1: It's been about 2 weeks since my original post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their feedback. Reading through the comments made me realize I needed to have an honest conversation with Sarah about everything. When I finally worked up the courage to talk to Sarah, she revealed that her anger wasn't just about this specific incident. Apparently, I have a long-standing pattern of trying to fix things on my own without communicating. She brought up several examples from over the years that I hadn't even realized were issues. One instance she mentioned was from when Jake was in high school. He was struggling with calculus and his grades were slipping. Instead of discussing it with Sarah or Jake's teachers, I spent weeks secretly tutoring him after school. I thought I was helping, but Sarah felt left out of an important parenting decision. Another example was when Eleanor was having trouble making friends in middle school. I arranged playdates and sleepovers without telling Eleanor, thinking I was solving the problem. But it just made Eleanor feel even more socially awkward and pressured. The most significant example was when Jake and Eleanor first had their falling out 6 years ago. I tried to trick them into reconciling by inviting them both to dinner without telling them the other would be there. It backfired horribly. Eleanor left in tears and Jake didn't speak to me for weeks. Sarah was furious with me then too, but I didn't see it as part of a larger problem. Hearing all this made me realize that Sarah was right. I do have a tendency to try to handle everything myself. I've always seen it as my job to protect my family and solve problems, but I now understand how my actions have often made things worse. I apologized to Sarah and promised to work on being more communicative going forward. After clearing the air with Sarah, we decided to reach out to Jake and Emma. They had just returned from their honeymoon, and we invited them over for dinner to discuss everything that happened. When they arrived, I started by apologizing for not telling them about Eleanor's threats sooner. Jake was understanding but admitted he wished he'd known what was going on. Emma was quieter and seemed more shaken by the whole thing. We asked them to tell us the full story of what happened between Emma and Eleanor in college. Emma explained that she and Eleanor had met at a LGBTQ+ student group meeting during Emma's freshman year. Eleanor was a junior and took Emma under her wing, helping her navigate coming out in college life. Their friendship turned romantic after a few months. Emma said it was intense and all-consuming, her first real relationship. But as the school year went on, Emma started to feel overwhelmed. She was struggling with her classes and feeling unsure about her major. Eleanor wanted to spend all their time together, and Emma felt guilty for wanting space. Eventually, Emma ended things abruptly, telling Eleanor she needed to focus on school. She now realizes how hurtful that must have been for Eleanor, but at the time, she was just trying to stay afloat. Emma lost touch with Eleanor after that. She changed her major from pre-med to business, which is how she eventually met Jake years later at a networking event. She had no idea Eleanor was Jake's sister until they'd already been dating for months. Jake said he knew Emma had dated women before him, but she never mentioned names. He had no clue about the connection to Eleanor. When he finally figured it out, he advised Emma not to reach out to Eleanor, given how volatile their relationship had become. Learning all this made Sarah and I realize how little we really knew about our children's lives. We felt like failures as parents for being so out of touch. How had we missed so much? Jake and Emma told us they're planning to file for a restraining order against Eleanor. Apparently, she's been sending harassing emails and messages on social media, not just to them but to their friends and coworkers as well. They're worried about what she might do next. Sarah and I are heartbroken that it's come to this, but we understand their decision. We told them we'll support whatever they need to do to feel safe. Part of me still wants to try to reason with Eleanor, to find a way to bring our family back together. But I'm learning to accept that I can't control or fix everything. As for Eleanor, we've decided we need to cut contact with her for now. Her behavior has become too erratic and destructive. We're looking into options for getting her professional help, but we can't force her to accept it. It's painful to feel so helpless when it comes to our own daughter. This whole situation has been eye-opening and painful. Sarah and I are in counseling to work on our communication issues. We're also trying to rebuild trust with Jake and Emma. It's a slow process, but I'm committed to doing better for my family. I know now that I should have handled things very differently from the start. I'm working on breaking my habit of trying to fix everything myself. It's not easy to change patterns that have been in place for decades, but I'm trying. I just hope it's not too late to repair the damage I've done. Update 2: It's been about a month since my last update. Things have calmed down somewhat, but we're still dealing with the fallout from everything that's happened. Jake and Emma did end up filing for a restraining order against Eleanor. The hearing was last week, and it was granted. Eleanor didn't show up to contest it, which honestly was probably for the best. The judge reviewed the evidence of her harassment, the threatening messages, the wedding vandalism, and some disturbing posts she'd made online about Emma, and quickly ruled in Jake and Emma's favor. We haven't heard directly from Eleanor since before the wedding. However, we found out through mutual acquaintances that she's been telling people a very warped version of events. She's claiming that Emma stole Jake from her and that we've all conspired against her. Some distant relatives have been calling us, confused and concerned about what's really going on. It's painful to hear how delusional Eleanor has become. Sarah and I have been struggling with guilt, wondering where we went wrong as parents. We've started seeing a family therapist to work through some of these feelings. The therapist has been helping us understand that while we may have made mistakes, Eleanor's actions are her own responsibility. One thing that's come up in therapy is how differently we treated Jake and Eleanor growing up. We always thought we were being fair, but looking back, we can see how we may have favored Jake unintentionally. He was easier to parent, outgoing, athletic, academically successful. Eleanor required more attention and patience, which we didn't always give her. We've also been discussing our family history of mental health issues. My mother struggled with what we now know was likely bipolar disorder, though it was never formally diagnosed. Sarah's brother has battled addiction for years. We're starting to see how these patterns may have influenced our parenting and our children's development. Jake and Emma seem to be doing well, all things considered. They just got back from their honeymoon and are settling into married life. They've been very understanding about the whole situation with Eleanor, which we're grateful for. Emma especially has shown a lot of compassion, given how Eleanor has targeted her. Last weekend, Jake and Emma came over for dinner. It was the first time we'd all been together since the wedding drama unfolded. There was some initial awkwardness, but as the evening went on, we found ourselves laughing and talking like we used to. It gave me hope that maybe, in time, we can heal as a family. Sarah and I are still working on our communication issues. It's been challenging at times, but I think we're making progress. We've had some difficult but necessary conversations about our parenting over the years. Sarah has been patient with me as I try to break my habit of trying to handle everything on my own. I'm learning to listen more and act less impulsively. One positive outcome is that this situation has brought Jake and us closer. He's been more open with us lately than he has in years. Last week, he called just to chat, something he hasn't done since college. We're trying to rebuild the trust and closeness we used to have. As for Eleanor, we're at a loss. We've tried reaching out through intermediaries to offer help, but she's rejected all contact. Her old roommate told us that Eleanor lost her job recently and has been acting erratically. We're worried about her, but we don't know how to help someone who doesn't want to be helped. We did send Eleanor a letter, telling her that we love her and that we're here if she ever wants to talk. We also urged her to seek professional help. We haven't heard back, but we hope that someday she'll be ready to reconnect. For now, we're focused on healing as a family and moving forward. It's not easy, and there are still tough days. But we're committed to learning from this experience and being better going forward.